Hi, my name is Jonathan Roth, and this is Risk Hedge Video. I'm joined from Austin, Texas, by George Friedman. He's the chairman and founder of Geopolitical Futures. George, thank you very much for joining me.
A pleasure.
I want to talk to you about two issues that seem to be revolving around the Trump administration right now. That really, some people, at least if you read the New York Times and the Washington Post, they seem to be probably the two biggest geopolitical risks that the world is facing right now. And that is Trump's relationship with both China and Iran. Let's start first with Iran. Just recently, the U.S. slapped sanctions on Iran again for some ballistic missile tests that Iran did. Obviously, the Obama administration signed this nuclear agreement with Iran that seemed to, at least to a certain extent, guarantee that in about 15 years or so, Iran could legally be developing some sort of nuclear bomb. Why don't you unpack for me this situation that seems to be developing between Trump and the Iranians?
An agreement was signed with the Obama administration. The question of development of ballistic missiles is somewhat blurry, but on the whole is something they should not do. The Iranians have decided to test Donald Trump. Donald Trump has said various things, but has taken no actions whatsoever against the Iranians, aside from the visa issue. And so now Donald Trump has to make a decision of how to manage the Iranian response. What he appears to be doing is moving in the same direction as Obama did, sanctions, but has taken no decisive step. But to the extent that there is a crisis happening, it would happen with Hillary as well, because I think the Iranians came out of the election with a read of the United States as fairly weak in terms of responses, and saw Clinton in the same sense as they saw Trump. Trump now has to make a decision, and he's got a problem. His national security advisor, Mike Flynn, is hostile to the Iranians. The Secretary of Defense, Mattis, he is not quite so hostile, or at least he is more cautious on engaging them. So he's got two people with very different views and a great deal of experience on the subject pulling in different directions. And that's why the Iranians did this. It was a perfect shot right in the middle of the Trump administration, and the worst that can happen is they stop firing missiles, and the best that can happen is create chaos in Washington.
Now, it seems to me that as you say, Trump does have an issue with Iran, but it's also clear that Trump may, and you obviously you can quibble with this, and I'm curious about your take, that Trump may actually need Iran to do what he wants to do with Syria. And then obviously there's the situation that's happening in Yemen, where there's a civil war that's clearly a proxy war between the Saudis and the Iranians, and the Saudis are obviously U.S. allies in general. So how do those relationships, how does that all get worked out?
The major split in the Islamic world is the split between Shiites and Sunnis. When we fought in World War II, the major issue was between Hitler and Stalin. The United States found that it was in its best interest to ally with Stalin against Hitler. Perfectly understandable choice. A very similar choice confronts the United States if it wants to engage ISIS. It can either be hostile to both the Shiites and the Sunnis, or try to use that split against ISIS. Now, from an ideological point of view, just as people are appalled that we would support Stalin and the Soviet Union, there are people appalled about Iran. From a military point of view, the U.S. probably doesn't have enough forces and doesn't want to commit those forces to unilaterally fight them. They need regional powers like Turkey and Iran. The Saudis probably don't want to engage. And so in this incredible complexity, a decision has to be made. Do we split the Islamic world and ally with part of it? Or do we try to make war in all the Islamic world simultaneously? And last time we faced this issue, we decided to split Hitler from Stalin.
Interesting. Okay, so moving from Iran to the China situation, obviously we could go in depth on the comments that Rex Tillerson, the Secretary of State, said about China and the islands. And why don't we play that clip right now?
we're going to have to send China a clear signal that first, the island building stops, and second, your access to those islands is also not going to be allowed.
So that's Rex Tillerson speaking about China at his confirmation hearings. So clearly, Tillerson at least has the opinion that they want to try to prevent China access to these islands, which China's response to that was that these are fighting words. If you take a look at who Trump appointed to a very high economic post in his administration, Peter Navarro. Obviously, Navarro, did a movie and a book called Death by China. He's clearly no fan. How do you see that relationship playing out? Because there are many that are seeing these developments vis-a-vis what's happened with the U.S. and the Philippines and China, where the Philippines, may be and maybe not moving away from the U.S. and into China's orbit. And even this latest phone call between Trump and the Prime Minister of Australia that seems to have gone off the rails. Clearly, Australia could potentially and is already at least, revolving around China's orbit, and we clearly don't want them going too close. How does this relationship, how do these various factions and disagreements, and obviously there's so much involved in this relationship, where is this going?
Well, first, what do the Chinese want, or what are they afraid of? You take a look at the line of islands around the South China Sea, and you can see that they can be easily blockaded. China is an exporting and importing country. It needs access to the world sea. The United States has a tendency to impose sanctions on countries and sometimes to interdict the flow. Those islands can strangle the Chinese. The Chinese want to be in a position to guarantee their access to the seas. A military confrontation is impossible. They have one brand new carrier group against 11 the U.S. has. The United States has strategic bombers in Diego Garcia and Guam. For all the propaganda, China does not have the military capability of challenging the United States. So it's in a situation where it is terrified that the U.S. is going to use its overwhelming power to blockade it from the ocean. Its big solution would be to find a large country, convert it into a pro-Chinese country, and then open the sea lanes that way. Indonesia is not going to do that. Australia is not going into the Chinese orbit over a bad phone call. The Philippines are the country to watch, because the Philippines have been flirting with the Chinese ever since President Duterte has been elected. If you look at a map, you'll see that if the Philippines became pro-Chinese, allowed Chinese basing and so on and so forth, any blockade of China would be impossible. So they don't have a military option. That's just talk. They do have a political option. That option is with the Philippines. So we have to watch very carefully what we do. And it's interesting to this point that the United States has been fairly gentle on the Filipinos. They haven't lashed out as they have at others. That's the game.
Okay, so two final questions for you, and one revolves around a potential scenario that China has done, at least to it seems like the last couple of presidents, where China has clearly tested the new president early in his term to see what sort of metal he's made out of. And there has been much concern, or at least I guess a red line that's been drawn in the sand over the Scarborough Shoal, which is a group of islands that's off the coast of the Philippines that China has kind of played around with for years, actually. But it seems like my understanding is that Obama told President Xi straight out that if you militarize those islands and do the same thing that you did on these other islands that they built in the South China Sea, that's our red line. So the question is do you believe that China will play that card to test Trump to see where he's at? And if they indeed do that, where do things go from there?
Well, the way I would look at it is in every previous presidency, the Chinese have tested the president. Trump beat everybody to it. He's testing the Chinese. He is telling them what the limits are. He's telling them what the agenda is, and he's telling them what the consequences are. If you're the Chinese and your naval capability is as limited as Chinese is, you can't afford to take the test, because the one thing you don't know about Trump is whether he's going to call the bluff. What he has positioned himself in as the wild card. where in almost all other presidencies for a very long time, really since Nixon was the last one, the president has been the predictable player, the stable player, and others have, tested it and so on. It's Trump doing testing. Trump is the wild card. And that really is a fundamental difference. It's not unprecedented in U.S. foreign policy. Richard Nixon did the same thing with the Russians and the Chinese when he's lying with the Chinese. But at this point, Trump has stolen something. If it turns out that Trump is telling the truth, the Chinese are not going to win that confrontation. And so the worst thing for China would be to test Trump, find out that he's going to send in the military, and have to back off. And there's no reason to believe that he won't. So when you're playing poker and you're the guy everybody thinks is crazy, you've got an edge.
Okay, so I'm going to take that last line and turn it around, and we can address an issue that seems to be on everyone's minds. And that is the bigger question as to whether or not Donald Trump has the fitness to be president. Because it appears from all the media reports that we've seen, some of the things that are coming out, there is definitely a narrative out there that says that Trump is in over his head, that he's not capable of thinking these issues to a deep level, that he's not intellectually curious, and that he's playing this in such a way that it frankly is scaring both his enemies and his friends. What is your take on the broad strategic play that Trump seems to be pushing forward? Do you believe, looking at what he's doing, that he has thought this through and that you believe in him as a person, or does that even matter at this point because of the others that he has around him?
The way I would put it is he has created a massive instability in the international system, which he argued very openly was stacked against the United States. It was not a stupid argument to make. So he's approached it in a way that no one else has approached it. But of course, no one else has taken the view that he had. I don't know him, so I don't know if he's smart or stupid. I can only judge by the actions. And so far, he's created an atmosphere of uncertainty. But he hasn't done anything particularly dangerous to the United States or any other country at this point. I recall Ronald Reagan, when he took office, when they said he was disengaged, he wasn't interested in the issues, he couldn't understand what was going on. The media loves to portray political leaders as idiots. It makes them feel better about the fact that even though they work in the same field, they'd never get elected to anything. So yes, I think there's a serious question about this. But from my point of view, the American public has answered it. They elected him president. And the media doesn't get to reverse the election as much as they might like. However, and this is the important part that I want to emphasize, if your goal is a radical restructuring of how the international system works, you cannot achieve that by continuing to behave as you did before. So, does he realize what he's doing? Well, he drew a red line with the Chinese. He's made it clear to the Germans that he's not prepared to play the game they're playing. He's made it clear to the Mexicans that I actually made a campaign promise on this and I'm going to keep it. And that, I think, is the most interesting thing about media. He made these promises, and the media has come into the view that no one is really going to keep their campaign promises. Obama and Guantanamo. They're shocked that he actually meant what he said. We will see how it plays out, but I am less appalled by his behavior, because if you're going to do what he said he was going to do and what he's elected to do, this is pretty much how he behaved.
Become a Risk Hedge Insider for free by clicking on the link below. Each week, you'll receive vital analysis on today's geopolitical, financial, and social risks. Just click on the link below to become a Risk Hedge Insider.